The cold tile pressed against my cheek, a dull ache where it had hit the floor. My breath hitched, sharp and shallow. The laptop screen glared, mocking. Access denied. Not for the third-party app, not for some random site. For our joint checking account. The one with the mortgage payment due next week. The shared savings we were building for whatever future we thought we had. I sat up, the room spinning just slightly. My fingers trembled as I tried the login again. The password I knew by heart, a string of numbers and letters that felt as familiar as my own name. Access denied. Again. My heart started a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was deliberate. Panic, cold and sharp, speared through the haze of disbelief. I tried the other account logins. Savings. Investment. His email. His phone had been conspicuously silent all morning. Not unusual, but now, heavy with dread. Each attempt met the same digital dead end. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. My husband. The man I built a life with. He had locked me out. Of everything. Of our money. He had severed the cord, silently, clinically, leaving me adrift in a sudden, terrifying financial void. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. The silence of the house, usually a comfort, now felt predatory listening. My world had just tilted on its axis, and I hadn't even seen the earthquake coming. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life, before that cold, bright laptop screen, felt solid, predictable. We had the house, a comfortable rhythm of work and weekends. James. He was James. Reliable, I thought. Quietly ambitious. We met at a corporate networking event, the kind of sterile environment designed for handshakes and forced smiles. He was in sales for a tech company, I was in vendor management at a large corporation. Different worlds, overlapping interests. We talked about work, about escaping the office, about building something real. It felt easy. Natural. Years folded into each other. The small apartment became the house in the suburbs. The shared meals became dinner parties. The quiet ambitions became shared goals. Retirement plans sketched on napkins, potential vacation spots circled in brochures, the soft, unspoken assumption of a future built side by side. We weren't the couple plastered all over social media with performative declarations of love, but we had a quiet companionship, a mutual respect. I thought we did anyway. My job was stable. I handled complex contracts, managed vendor relationships, negotiated renewals for key services. It was detail-oriented, sometimes monotonous, but it paid well, offered security. James's company, a software firm, wasn't one of our direct vendors, but they worked closely with several of our major suppliers. I knew the landscape. I knew the players. I knew the intricate web of connections that kept the corporate world spinning. It was knowledge I took for granted, just part of the daily grind. I never imagined it would become my shield, my weapon. He traveled sometimes for work. Long stretches in conference rooms, late nights entertaining clients. I understood. My job demanded long hours sometimes too. We trusted each other. Or more accurately, I trusted him. Blindly. Willfully. Looking back now, it's easy to see the cracks. The late-night texts he'd quickly dismiss. The guarded phone calls. The sudden need for space, or alone time. I smoothed them over, told myself it was stress from his job, the pressure of sales targets. I was busy building our life, brick by brick, too focused on the structure to notice the termites eating away at the foundation. The inciting incident wasn't a dramatic confession. It was mundane, cruel in its casualness. An email, addressed to him, but left open on the desktop. A confirmation for a weekend trip. Not a solo trip. With a name I didn't recognize. A woman's name. Followed by a string of emojis that left no room for innocent interpretation. My stomach dropped. The air left my lungs. It was like stepping off a cliff I didn't know was there. He came home later that night, oblivious, whistling softly as he unlocked the door. The smell of his cologne, usually comforting, now felt foreign, tainted. I confronted him. The conversation was a blur of his clumsy lies, my rising fury, his eventual, reluctant trickle of truth. It wasn't just a trip. It was ongoing. For months. The woman was a client contact. Someone he saw regularly through work. The details aren't important now. What matters is the betrayal, the deliberate deception, the shattering of every assumption I held dear. He stood there, defensive, cornered. And then he shifted. From guilt to calculation. His eyes hardened. He started talking about lawyers, about assets, about dividing things up. It was chilling. Like a switch flipped, turning off the person I thought I knew and revealing someone cold, pragmatic, ruthless. He wasn't apologizing for breaking my heart. He was strategizing his exit, his advantage. That night, I barely slept. I watched him sleep, this stranger beside me, and felt a profound, terrifying loneliness. The next morning, he was gone before I woke. No note, just a silence that screamed louder than any argument. I reached for my laptop. To check the accounts. To see where we stood financially. To begin the terrifying process of figuring out how to untangle my life from his. That's when I saw it. The access denied message. The first sharp blow. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about control. Financial control. He wasn't just leaving. He was trying to cripple me on the way out. The early struggles were a descent into chaos. My attempts to access the accounts were met with automated responses, then escalating levels of corporate bureaucracy. Because his name was listed first on most accounts, because he had set them up initially, he had the power to revoke my access. I spent hours on the phone, repeating my name, my address, my date of birth, trying to prove I was half of the equation, half of the ownership. But the system, designed for simpler disputes, was ill-equipped for this kind of deliberate lockout. The bank representatives were polite, but unhelpful. "We need documentation," they'd say. A court order, a court order? This was happening now. The bills were due now. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. Every call ended with the same frustrating wall, the same polite, impenetrable refusal. I called a lawyer. The consultation was a cold splash of reality. Divorce is slow. Contested divorce is glacial. Getting access to marital assets when one party is actively hiding them is a battle that takes time, resources, and legal maneuvering. Time I didn't feel I had. Resources I was now being actively denied access to. The lawyer outlined the steps, the filings, the discovery process. It sounded like a war that would be fought on paper, in courtrooms, bleeding me dry emotionally and financially while the process unfolded. Meanwhile, the practicalities of life crashed down. I needed gas for my car. I needed groceries. My personal account, the small one I kept for pocket money and impulse buys, was dwindling rapidly. He hadn't touched that one, probably didn't even think it was significant enough to bother with. It felt like he had left me a handful of crumbs and walked away from the feast. I tried calling him. My calls went unanswered. My texts ignored. It was complete, utter silence. He had not only locked me out financially, he had emotionally vanished. This wasn't just about the other woman anymore. This was about power, about control, about stripping me bare. The fear was a constant companion. It sat on my chest at night, making it hard to breathe. It buzzed in my ears during the day, a low hum of anxiety. How long could I last? What would happen when my small account ran out? Would I have to beg? Would I lose the house? The life we had built felt like a sandcastle, and he was kicking it down, grain by grain. The deepening crisis hit when the first bill bounced. Not the mortgage. Thankfully, I'd managed to scrape together enough from my personal account and a desperate call to a friend to cover that, but a smaller one. A utility bill. The notification popped up on my phone, stark and unforgiving. Followed quickly by an overdraft fee notice. My carefully guarded personal account, the only buffer I had left, was now in the negative. It was a small thing, objectively, a few $100s, but it felt like the levee breaking. It wasn't just money anymore. It was dignity. It was the fear of the lights being shut off, of the water running cold. It was the raw, visceral understanding of how utterly exposed and vulnerable he had made me. I sat in the dark kitchen that night, the silence pressing in, and felt a despair so deep it was physical. Every avenue felt blocked. The banks wouldn't help without a court order. A court order would take months, maybe a year, in which time he could drain everything, hide everything. The lawyer was talking strategies that felt like fighting a ghost. He had planned this. Planned to leave me with nothing, or as close to nothing as possible. My job felt precarious. Could he try to interfere with that? Spread rumors? Undermine me professionally? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. My job wasn't just income, it was my identity, my stability, the last solid ground I had left. I scrolled through my contacts list, looking for anyone who might help. Family lived far away, already dealing with their own struggles. Friends offered sympathy, a shoulder to cry on, but they couldn't conjure money or break through legal walls. I felt utterly alone, abandoned in a financial wilderness created by the man who had promised to protect me. Tears streamed down my face, hot and useless. I was cornered. Trapped. He had thought of everything, or so it seemed. He had calculated every move, anticipating my reactions, blocking every escape route. I was just the inconvenient obstacle to his new life, easily removed with a few clicks and changed passwords. And then, sitting there in the oppressive dark, staring at the glowing screen of my phone, something shifted. Not a sudden revelation, but a slow, dawning awareness. A connection formed between the fear and the anger, between the helplessness and the simmering resentment. He had used his knowledge of our shared life, of my habits, of the system, to dismantle me. But I had my own knowledge, my own system, my own leverage. It was a fragile, dangerous thought at first, easily dismissed. It couldn't work. It was too risky. But as the desperation mounted, as the cold reality of my situation pressed down, the thought solidified. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a possibility. A terrifying, exhilarating possibility. My job. Vendor management. Negotiating contracts. James's company wasn't a direct vendor of mine, but they provided critical software and services to some of my company's largest, most strategic suppliers. Suppliers whose own multi-million-dollar contracts with my company came across my desk. Suppliers whose performance, and thus their reliance on his company's software, directly impacted their ability to meet the terms of our contracts. I knew the renewal cycles. I knew the key dates. I knew the performance metrics that mattered. I knew the pressure points. I knew, for instance, that one of our biggest suppliers, Apex Systems, was heavily reliant on a specific software suite provided by James's company. Their contract with my company, worth tens of millions annually, was up for renewal in 3 months. And their contract with James's company? It was also up for renewal. And I knew, from hushed conversations and conference calls, from internal memos, that Apex Systems was deeply unhappy with the service they were receiving from James's firm. They were looking for alternatives. It wasn't my job to manage Apex Systems' relationship with James's company, but it was my job to ensure Apex Systems was performing optimally for my company. And any disruption in their critical software services would absolutely impact their performance metrics, which would, in turn, impact their contract renewal with me. This wasn't just leverage. It was a fulcrum. I didn't need to interact with James's company directly. I needed to interact with Apex Systems. I needed to do my job diligently, precisely, and perhaps highlight certain risks, certain performance issues of their critical software vendor. Issues I was already peripherally aware of, but which now took on a sudden, urgent significance. The midpoint shift. It wasn't about getting my money back anymore. Not just that. It was about evening the score, about turning his weapon back on him. He thought he had cut me off, financially crippled me. He hadn't considered that the professional world he operated in intersected with mine in ways he didn't fully grasp. He hadn't considered that the detailed, monotonous work I did every day gave me a unique perspective, a unique point of influence. The despair didn't vanish, but but it was joined by a cold, hard resolve. I stopped crying. I started thinking, strategizing. My mind, previously clouded by fear and hurt, began to see patterns, connections, opportunities. He had underestimated me. He had seen me as the wife, the homemaker, the emotional partner. He hadn't seen me as the professional, the negotiator, the one who understood the intricate machinery of corporate contracts and dependencies. This wasn't just revenge. It felt necessary. Survival instinct kicking in, shedding the skin of the naive wife, and revealing something harder underneath. He had fired the first shot, aiming for my financial lifeline. Now I saw a way to aim for his. The realization was both terrifying and empowering. Using my professional knowledge, my position, for personal gain? It felt wrong. It skirted ethical lines I'd never contemplated crossing. My company had strict policies. Could I lose my job? Could this backfire catastrophically? The risks were enormous. But the alternative felt worse. To be a victim. To watch him walk away, taking everything, leaving me broken and vulnerable. The image of his smug, calculated look when he started talking about assets burned in my mind. The coldness in his eyes as he locked me out of our life. He hadn't shown me mercy. Why should I extend it to him? The turning point came after a particularly frustrating call with the lawyer. He explained the long, arduous process of discovery, of subpoenaing records, of fighting for every dollar. It sounded exhausting, expensive, and uncertain. He mentioned that if James had offshore accounts or complex business structures, it could take years to untangle, if ever. Years. Years of living in limbo, of fighting for what was rightfully half mine, while he potentially lived comfortably off the very assets he had locked me out of. That's when the switch flipped definitively. I wasn't going to wait for the courts. I wasn't going to play by his rules. He had taken the fight outside the boundaries of fairness and decency when he locked me out. Now I would fight him on my own terms, on my own turf. My turf was the corporate ecosystem I navigated every day. My weapons were contracts, performance reviews, vendor relationships. I spent the next few days in a blur of focused research, reviewing Apex Systems' contract with my company, cross-referencing it with what little I knew about their reliance on James's company's software, digging into internal memos, performance reports, anything that shed light on the relationship between Apex and their critical vendors. I discovered that Apex Systems was indeed underperforming in a key area, data processing speed, and they attributed it internally, according to a leaked memo I found buried deep in the shared drive, to issues with the software provided by James's firm. Their renewal with my company was contingent on improving these metrics. Suddenly, my leverage wasn't just theoretical. It was concrete. I started documenting everything. Not just James's actions, but the professional landscape, the contractual dependencies, the performance issues, the timelines. It felt like building a case not for a divorce court but for a different kind of judgment. The decision solidified. I would use my position. Not recklessly, not illegally, but strategically. I would highlight the performance issues of Apex Systems, directly linking them to their software vendor, James's company. I would raise concerns internally, push for rigorous reviews, ensure that the renewal of Apex Systems' contract was made explicitly contingent on resolving these software issues. Knowing the timelines, knowing the pressure Apex was under, this would put immense pressure on James's company. And given the critical nature of the Apex Systems contract for James's firm, a significant portion of their annual revenue, I'd gleaned from industry reports, disrupting it would hit him where it hurt most: his professional standing, his company's bottom line, and ultimately, his financial security. The stakes felt immense. My job, my future, everything rested on this gamble. But the fear of inaction, of remaining a passive victim, finally outweighed the fear of the consequences. I squared my shoulders. The crying had stopped. A chilling calm settled over me. I was ready to fight. The climax wasn't a single explosive confrontation. It was a carefully orchestrated series of events, unfolding over weeks, building pressure in the corporate world James inhabited, a pressure he wouldn't immediately connect back to me, the wife he thought he'd neutralized. I started subtly. In meetings regarding the upcoming Apex Systems renewal, I began raising pointed questions. Are we confident in Apex's ability to meet the new data processing speed targets? I'd ask, my tone neutral, professional. What assurances do we have regarding the stability and performance of their critical vendor infrastructure? I requested detailed performance reports from Apex, digging into the data, cross-referencing it with known issues related to the type of software James's company provided. I flagged discrepancies, highlighted slowdowns, asked for root cause analyses. My colleagues saw it as diligence. My boss praised my thoroughness. It was just me doing my job, but with a razor-sharp focus, guided by a hidden agenda. I scheduled a meeting with a key account manager at Apex Systems responsible for their relationship with my company. Officially, it was to discuss the upcoming renewal and performance benchmarks. Unofficially, it was about opening a door. During the meeting, I was empathetic but firm about their performance gaps. We understand there are challenges, I said, leaning forward slightly. We want to work with you to ensure a smooth renewal. To do that, we need confidence that these critical infrastructure issues are being addressed. Specifically, the reliability and speed of the software you rely on for this processing. We've noted some inconsistencies. The account manager, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, immediately became defensive about their own operations, but her expression shifted when I mentioned their software vendor. Her eyes flickered. We're aware of those issues, she admitted, lowering her voice slightly. It's been a source of significant frustration. This was it. The opening. We need to understand the risk this poses to your ability to meet our contractual requirements. I pressed, my voice low. As you know, the renewal is contingent on demonstrated performance improvement in this area. If the issue lies with a critical third-party vendor, we need to understand their plan for resolution. Frankly, we need to be confident in your entire supply chain for this service. Brenda hesitated, then confided in me, quietly listing the myriad problems they were having with James's company's software and support. Delays in updates, bugs that weren't being fixed, unresponsive technical support. They were, she admitted, actively evaluating alternatives, but switching software providers for such a critical function was complex and time-consuming. They were hoping James's company would fix things before the renewal deadline forced their hand. This was gold. I listened carefully, asking targeted questions, gathering details. I didn't explicitly say dump James's company. I didn't have to. By highlighting the performance issues to her, tying it directly to her company's multi-million-dollar contract with my company, I was subtly but powerfully turning the screws. I was giving her company the corporate justification they needed, the external pressure they could point to internally, to insist James's company fix things immediately or risk losing their business. And I knew James's company was already on thin ice with them. My actions set off a chain reaction. Apex Systems, now feeling the heat from their major client, my company, escalated their complaints to James's company with renewed urgency. They demanded immediate fixes, dedicated support, and guarantees they hadn't previously insisted on. They mentioned that their relationship with their largest client, me, was at stake. Meanwhile, I continued my due diligence internally. I drafted reports for my boss outlining the performance risks associated with Apex Systems' reliance on their problematic software vendor. I recommended making the contract renewal conditional not just on Apex's improved metrics, but on documented progress from their software vendor in resolving the underlying issues. My recommendations were approved. It was standard corporate risk management, except I knew exactly which vendor I was targeting and why. The pressure on James's company mounted. Their key client, Apex Systems, was suddenly issuing ultimatums, threatening to pull their massive contract if their software issues weren't fixed now. James, being in sales, was likely one of the first to feel the heat. Revenue was drying up, commissions were at risk. He called me. Finally. After weeks of silence. I almost didn't answer, but I did. My voice was steady, devoid of emotion. What do you want, James? His voice was strained, tense. He didn't mention the accounts, didn't mention the divorce. He started talking about work. Apex Systems, he said, his voice tight. What have you done? My heart leaped. He knew. Not how, not exactly, but He felt the repercussions. He saw the connection.
Done.
I replied, my tone innocent. I've been doing my job, James. Managing vendor relationships. Ensuring our suppliers meet their performance targets. Apex Systems has been underperforming. Their reliance on unreliable software is a significant risk to our contract.
There was a beat of silence on the line.
He hadn't anticipated this. He thought my world was contained within the walls of our house, easily dismantled with a few keystrokes. He hadn't imagined my professional world intersecting with his, let alone becoming a force he couldn't control. You're doing this because of everything, aren't you? He accused, his voice rising. I'm doing my job, James, I repeated, the lie feeling sharp and clean on my tongue. Ensuring my company's interests are protected. It's a shame Apex Systems' critical vendor is causing them so much trouble. It puts their contract with us at risk, which I'm sure puts your company's contract with them at risk. Seems like a rather fragile chain of dependency, doesn't it? One link breaks, the whole thing collapses. I could almost hear the color draining from his face. He had thought locking me out of our joint accounts was the ultimate power play. He had cut off my access to liquid cash, leaving me floundering. But he hadn't considered that his liquidity, his professional standing, depended on a complex ecosystem that I understood and that I could influence. He had come for my money. I was coming for the source of his.
He sputtered, threatened.
He mentioned lawyers interfering with his business. Interfering? I countered, my voice still dangerously calm. I'm documenting performance issues based on objective data. I'm ensuring contractual obligations are met. That's not interference, James. That's good business practice. Something you clearly know nothing about. The conversation devolved into his desperate attempts to backtrack, to negotiate. He offered access to some accounts, a partial truce. Too little, too late. He had shown me his true nature. You made your choice, James, I said, cutting him off. When you locked me out, you showed me exactly where I stood. Now you know where you stand with me. Professionally, I have a responsibility to my company. And personally, well, let's just say I'm ensuring fair compensation for damages.
Consider this.
Market correction. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, but not from fear. From a cold, deep satisfaction. He was blindsided. Utterly. The man who thought he held all the cards suddenly found the entire deck stacked against him, using cards I held in my own hand, cards he hadn't even known existed. He thought he was destroying my life. He was actually handing me the blueprint to dismantle his. The aftermath wasn't triumphant in the way movies portray victory. There wasn't a surge of pure joy. There was relief, yes, a massive weight lifting from my chest. But it was a cold relief, tinged with sadness for the life that had been a lie and weariness from the battle fought. James's company scrambled. Faced with the very real threat of losing the Apex Systems contract, a loss that would have sent shockwaves through their balance sheet and potentially cost him his job or at least significant income, they threw resources at the problem. Updates were rushed out, support staff was deployed, promises were made. Apex Systems, satisfied that their concerns were finally being addressed under duress, continued their contract with James's firm, but the relationship was damaged. And James, I heard through professional channels, was heavily reprimanded, his position weakened. The golden boy of sales had stumbled, and everyone knew it was tied to the Apex Systems fiasco, the subtle origins of which remained opaque to most, a perfect storm of bad timing and technical issues. He didn't fight me in court over the assets with the same ferocity he initially intended. Perhaps he knew I had other means of persuasion, other ways to make things difficult for him. Or perhaps the professional blow had humbled him, showing him the limits of his control. The divorce proceeded more smoothly than the lawyer had initially predicted. I got a fair settlement, access to the accounts restored, and a portion of the savings. Not without negotiation, not without stress, but without the protracted war of attrition I had feared. I kept my job. My actions, viewed through the lens of corporate due diligence, were unimpeachable. I had identified a risk and taken steps to mitigate it. My reputation at work was enhanced, if anything. I was seen as sharp, detail-oriented, someone who protected the company's interests. The ethical tightrope I walked was invisible to everyone but me. There's no grand, satisfying revenge narrative where he ended up penniless and alone while I rode off into the sunset. Life is rarely that neat. He suffered professional consequences, a significant financial hit compared to what he expected, and the public humiliation of his affair becoming known within certain circles. He lost the power he craved over me, and I regained control of my own life, my own finances. The house felt different after he was gone. Quieter, emptier. But it was mine again. The cold tile floor where I'd first crumpled now just felt like floor. The fear eventually receded, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild. What did I learn? That trust is a fragile thing, easily broken. That the systems we rely on, whether personal or professional, can be manipulated. And that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is the knowledge you've accumulated just by showing up, by doing the work, by understanding the intricate connections that hold the world together. He thought he was cutting me off. He didn't realize he was putting the wire right into my hands. And I knew exactly where to plug it in. It wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about reclaiming my power. My agency. He tried to leave me with nothing. He ended up losing far more than he could have imagined. And I walked away, scarred, yes, but stronger. And undeniably, finally free. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.